It's nice to be here, and thanks so much for asking me to do this. I don't speak in Denver very often at all, and so it's like part of a treat to participate with my community here, to tell people what I do in their community so they can choose to participate, and to be sort of openly grateful in front of the people who'll help me do things too, which is really just so sweet. This is our plan, if that's okay. And I will spend some time talking about me to you just because I think on whatever level we do this to qualify each other, we talk about what we do and how we approach things. You would need to know that about me to have a sense of how much enjoyment I get from the work I do and how serious I am about it. There is, if more than a dozen people or so get together and you don't think about like your ancestors and the people who were here before, and just take a second to breathe through the idea that the global capitalism on every scale has destroyed whole cultures on this continent. If you don't take that minute when 12 or more people get together, I think it's a missed opportunity. I just breathe through it. I care a lot about it. And the way that I participate in supporting or being an ally for people of the First Nations here is by helping create awareness of their stories, their culture, their art, and their cultural criticism. Because there are such things as like First Nations intellectuals who make products that you can interact with to learn more about their circumstance and the continued attempted genocide of an entire people. So my mother and my father are from these two places, Trinidad and Tobago off the coast of Venezuela, and Guyana, Georgetown, Guyana, colonized by British people. I'm from here, that's Felday Road. The star above is the hospital I was born in. If that river is not familiar to you, this is the actual place. I spent all of the 70s in London as a young person. I spent half of the 80s in Washington, D.C. as an immigrant, newly minted immigrant. I spent the 90s in New York City, and then I spent the last part of my 35 years or so here. And this is me. And so when you think of London, New York, and not Colorado, but DC, there are movements that I belong well in. I'm a part author in the You Need a Manifesto book. I'm included in this book called How Ideas Are Born, and I'm an essayist in this book called The Black Experience in Design. And this is a bit of my work. Just lean in, relax, stretch, do whatever. You don't get Roots Manuva blasting a good track at you, but you get to see the work, and I can walk you through it. My practice is generally a combination of things. It's abstraction, it's rationalization, it's communication, it's graphic design. There's also a lot of research and a lot of ideas built into my work that makes my practice and my life in design kind of a moving target. I've done many, many things, and I'm happy to continue to do many more. As a collagist, or as a person that does messaging, or as a person who makes objects or designs objects, the bookshelf full of letters, right? Public art with letters, pouring cement, making public art, all sorts of different ideas, doing graffiti projects that get us caught by the police. That was an interesting story. And designing games. I've done so many things over 30 years, but I've actually landed in a place that is much more about the communities that I live in and work in and attempt to serve, and the experiences that I and other people have in those communities, and I keep on being drawn into it, and I feel like it's a great gift to do important work with important people at an important time. And so I've shifted from a person who used to care deeply about letter spacing, a thing called kerning. I still do manual typesetting. I still use an 1895 printing press. I still do all these things, but I also have shifted to thinking about communities and systems in ways that I'm flexing just another part of my brain muscle, and I'm mapping what I do somewhat naturally onto other people's ideas and trying to move concepts forward that I almost am learning in real time. And the reason why I say that is just because we are at our greatest when we are learning. We actually are. Like, we are the most open when we're open. It can't be a surprise to you all. But also to stay open and to kind of use whatever type of metaphorical pry bars to keep yourselves from snapping closed around ideas like comparing yourself to a person who's making more money than you as a way of defining your value. I really have to, and with deft respect to the previous speakers, I really have to just say, so what if a dog walker makes more than you? So what? Maybe that person has got an entirely different circumstance, and on the surface, there shouldn't be any offense with that. There shouldn't be anything. In fact, I would want, if I could afford, the best dog walker for my beautiful dog. And I would spend any part of my income that I would just, align to that purpose. I would spend it freely in that and want the best life for that person. We can't define ourselves by comparison and competition. It's the old way, and it only continues to concentrate power. That's all it's for. And in that situation, there's a lot of losers, a lot of people who are victims. So this is the building that you would find me in downtown Denver. If you ever drive past this building, you'll know so. This is the sort of center of operations for Matter. And my partner, who's over here, and I run a few different parts of the enterprise. One is a bookstore, a cultural justice bookstore. Another one is a design bookstore that's connected to that. We have a print shop, and we have a design practice upstairs where we do a number of different projects. And this is very intentional scale for us. It doesn't bother us that we're not bigger. Sometimes it bothers us that we're not as well capitalized as we could be to do more. But like I said, competition is a slippery slope, and we're quite intentional about the type of capitalists that we are. We're all in a different place. I would like to create space and respect for the idea that things are nuanced and that we're not racing towards solutions here. This is about ideas, and this is the name of our show. There are lots of theories of change. And when you're listening to or when you're reading intellectuals from other parts of the world, you actually end up in a lot of political theories of change, including theories of communism, theories of socialism, various theories of socialism, various versions of communism. And as it weaves through history and time, you're also looking at things like Marxism. It would, like the United States and the people who are trying to make change here, would do well to examine all models of change before sort of deciding that there's an American one that's best because it's American. There are lots of transitions. And when I say this, I mean the annoying, elaborate poem that you had to read for class, and you're like, fuck poetry, man, it's just words. Right, but I care deeply about it, so think of me as a kind of a heartbroken poet in some ways, just trying to deliver some meaningful ideas. And to others, something quite different. I like to start with definitions, and so, this change suggests a kind of movement for sure. It's anything that is large had to change to get large. Are you good with that? Are we all good with that? Anything that's big wasn't always big. It had to change to get big. So it has experienced something. And if you guys are little sort of, science curious like me, if I say the word zygote, you're like, yeah, that's like cell division. That's like the first thing. Right. It's cell division. Pause. That's a type of addition. And there is a whole series of events that follow that work at a completely different scale. And I want you to think about scale and arithmetic progressions and exponent progressions. And I want you to think about that for just a minute, right? Because cities are sometimes, I call them geographies. I call municipalities geographies, right? When I ask someone where they're from, I say, what geography are you in? So I let them define it in any way they like to, particularly if they want to say, oh, I do my best work and I sell books and do talks and stuff like that on Arapaho land and Ute land, on Shoshone land, right? They could say that and it would be legit. Not where are you from, like tell me the city, what city do you live in? Talk about the place in a way that makes sense to you. So I say geography, what geography are you in? And then I think about atmosphere. And these are both things we share. We share geographies, we share atmospheres. Atmospheres are interesting because we share them and then we also co-create them, right? And as it turns out, as parts of America and other parts of the world kind of get swallowed up by an angry sea, pause again, because you know what I'm talking about. We'll just take a second over it. So as that happens, we're thinking about geographies really differently. And we're thinking about whether it's prudent to participate in various geographies, Tennessee. And we're wondering, what is the competitive analysis around that? Like, what makes one place better than another? So we're thinking about it quite dramatically, quite quickly. These are machines. These are computers. We do know how to work them. And then the word systems. Systems are lots of things. Lots of people make shapes out of systems. You'll understand me better when I say things like, I'm so sad that there are only so many shapes, that all the shapes have something in common, yet the shapes are trying to suggest that they don't have something in common. Hey. And that's a view of systems as made as sort of neutral things, right? And then there are people in systems, and people participate in systems both voluntarily and involuntarily. Facts. And when I say services, I actually mean this. I know some people thought I was going to say another kind of service design. This is your chance. The elevator's right there. It's cool. I'm so sorry for me leading you on, but when you live in a place and you're trying to look at the levers and the pulleys of its competitive nature as a geography, right? And you say, oh, do they know how to take care of people's basic needs? And for some people, basic needs include shoveling the sidewalk or their street. And for some people, it's about legislative and political access, meaning that this is the layer of transparency that a municipality can show to its people. It says, hey, you have access to political processes. And you make the rules where you live, which is legislation. Protection, we'll talk about that later. Safety, right? Grown. And then stated priorities, which is what's left over. Generally speaking, a place like Colorado can say, we have a stated priority to remove the prohibitions on alcohol and cannabis and psilocybin all first. That's just our brand. People say Denver doesn't have a brand. That's the fucking brand. And there are lots of transitions. For municipalities, I tend to think of them like this: target-focused, issue-based, and when I say issue-based, I mean an issue has been brought to bear, or when I say target-focused, someone has been aware of a target where they want to be competitive with another municipality or geography or city or et cetera. The reprioritization or the redistribution of some assets or resources, and then a pivot, which is a nice way of saying, oops. That's it. Transitions for people are quite different. Transitions for people are either anticipated or unanticipated, they're causal and they're sequential. And we understand our own lives quite differently till we understand the way that the place that we live in is. We don't have an expectation of them being the same. I mean, we shouldn't. How's that? We shouldn't. Because people are way more vulnerable than municipalities. And so unanticipated events or transitions or moments, these things can have catastrophic effects on human beings, whereas cities have reserves and resources that they oftentimes reach into, and they make it right, as we've recently seen. Yeah. Friction, lubrication, resources, systems, gatekeepers. Sometimes it looks like this. Everyone's humming. Sometimes looks like this. Very confusing, right and wrong ways, a lot of anxiety. The way that you participate is kind of stacked and weird, and everything wants to look like it's benign, but really you haven't explored the negative and positive consequences of certain kinds of growth. And the problem with being big and being bureaucratic is that this is just so damn true. Does everyone know what I mean? I'm making eye contact, weird eye contact, what's up? Yeah, you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? I don't want to go explore this more than I have to. So, and part of the reason is because we've all actually experienced a period of time where it's been a good thing to grow your savings portfolio, whatever your financial product investment is. It's been a good time to grow it, and this is what's happened, right? Your stowed away 401k product or whatever else you're in, crypto. It's all out there outperforming what cities can do. And that's kind of problematic because you can't regulate a business that's bigger than the municipality. Not that I'm a huge fan of regulation, I'm just saying that you lose the option. And when you lose the option, you lose a certain amount of leverage, which is another reason why global growth imperatives aren't particularly great. And I don't think it's necessarily a good idea in the same way that I don't think that, bear with me for a moment while I tell this brief story, I don't think it's great that you train Boy Scouts to help old ladies across the street instead of making a curb cut for all people who are differently abled, right? Right. So in some sense, I'm not a huge fan of collaborating with people who are profound capitalists or people who are interested in a single bottom line, because it tends to take municipalities into a kind of theme park for capitalism kind of space. And I think you guys all know it, in the rural communities, when the Best Buy shows up, no one's a redneck anymore. In big old cities like this, what ends up happening is that certain chains show up and it's a mark of a neighborhood gentrifying and property values going up, which, by the way, is a certain amount of involuntary participation in the system, right? Now, do you understand what I mean by involuntary? Cool, let's keep on. So transition design is actually a thing. And I'll help you. How many people have heard of or understand transition design principles? Yeah, hi, Thank you. Cool. Awesome. Great. Great. So this will be old hat to you, but you know it's never a bad idea to sharpen what you know. I've become friends with Terry Irwin, Gideon Kossoff, and Cameron Tonkinwise, who all have been running the Carnegie Mellon School of Transition Design. It's a PhD program, and I've learned tremendous things from them. So I thought I really should quote them and just kind of pull it from there. There are some other schools of transition design. I know that there's work being done at Northeastern University. So it's not the only, but this is my preferred pull. Transition design is a transdisciplinary approach aimed at addressing the many wicked problems confronting 21st century societies: climate change, forced migration, political and social polarization, global pandemics, lack of access to affordable housing, healthcare, education, and many others. These problems are interconnected, interdependent, and always manifest in place and specific and culture-specific ways. Transition design argues that a new knowledge and new skill sets are required to address these problems, and that their resolution is a strategy for igniting positive, systems-level change and societal transitions toward more sustainable, equitable, and desirable long-term futures. I know that was a lot. Look it up, find it. It's juicy, please. And sit with it. Like any definition, you pull it apart, you're like, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. I don't know what that means yet. I'll come back. You know, I mean, you dance around it for a while so you can absorb it properly. And so there are images like this that Gideon and Terry and Cameron have created, which help you understand new ways of thinking and designing theories of change, mindset, posture, and of course, the shorthand for that is the concept of a worldview. You can't have a worldview if you're not really into geography. You can't have a worldview if you're not understanding the struggles of people around the world or on other continents. It would be a good idea to develop one and then have a very particular slant to it, you know? Like you can have a worldview that talks about the migration, the free movement of free people and the possibility of migration of human beings across the planet. You could have a worldview that's focused on women's, liberation. You could have a worldview that's focused on anti-blackness. There are a lot of worldviews to have, but the point is to take something fairly narrow and to map it across the world so you have a broad sense of what's been strategically applied to it already, or what some of the best ideas in that framework or in that space are, so you can learn from them and move forward. And so design for service, this is a chart that's a few years old, but I do admit that the mature discipline here is service design, says your Instacart driver. The developing discipline is design for social innovation, which is still wrapped up in a lot of sort of controversy and unnecessarily mired in ideas that were born from early microfinance ideas or NGOs and other types of activities. And then the emergent discipline is transition design. So it is relatively new, so you don't have to know a lot about it, which means I could be kind of wrong a little bit, but anyway, whatever, I'll just move on. And when I say not, again, so the apology is, when I say service design, I mean this service, this level of service that cities should get into. And I've always said, because I'm British, of course, that healthcare as a product is the kind of product that costs so much and applies so well to so many people that it's the kind of business that only a city or a state should get involved in. But we really have massive businesses whose incentives to work with the populations of various municipalities are to extract from them, and in this case, capital. But I don't know how many of you guys are like, kind of think it's obvious that you hate your utilities. Like, you're like, oh, that went up, like essential life shit, and nothing keeps pace with the wages that you're making. it's kind of a perpetual problem, and it was created by our predecessors, people who are in charge of shit, people who are talking to other people, trying to convince them of stuff, people who are using rhetoric. It's all that tool. Project number 1. I don't know if you knew this, but Denver last year did a participatory budgeting project. Anyone know about it? Cool. Couple of $1 million. Couple of $1 million thrown into the work of the people by way of a set of conditions that people had written. And I'll give you, if you shut your eyes, I'll tell you a nice little story about how it happens. The beauty of this story is it probably is better done with your eyes shut because I have all these funny twitches that I do. But here's the principal idea. People have an allocation of money. They use it to put other people in the same room as each other who exist in the same atmosphere, something they share, something fairly intimate, right? A neighborhood in Denver. They convene with the purpose of prioritizing the challenges that are in their exact geography, their exact atmosphere, their exact block, their exact neighborhood. And they compete with rhetoric for the opportunity to get them funded by monies that have been specifically pushed over to their neighborhood and say, we haven't spent some time with you. Why don't you guys spend some time talking about and thinking about what it is you would like to do with $3,000 or $4,000 or, no, I'm just kidding. It's $30,000 to $300,000, which is really what the benefit is. It started with this document right here. It's the first document I made for the project, and it's basically called a language plan. Because if you intend to do work in communities, you have to have a sense of what languages make them comfortable, what languages you're showing a bias towards, what languages you have to participate in. And instead of saying specifically that there were 14 different languages or language targeted groups, what we did was I made a plan that said, this is the scale at which we'll engage in translation so we can prepare, right? Because when you're spending money, having a plan is a great idea. It's gonna divert from this, but this language plan is a signal to the people involved that we care about them and that it isn't about just the people who show up to speak one of 2 colonial languages, English or Spanish. Gotcha. It's actually about people who speak Amharic and various people with Korean, and it's just what our city's made up of. And so there's an obligation to meet the needs of some of those people too. And it looks a little bit like that. And this is our ballot, We designed it so it would be really easy to make translations with. It's a lot of open spaces. And these are some of the projects that people wanted to fund. A light signal safety for people with disabilities, outdoor fitness equipment for older adults, wider and more accessible sidewalks for people with disabilities and older adults, tiny homes for people experiencing homelessness, community gardens for subsidized housing areas, cleaner parks, stronger minds, and cleaner air for 5 Points and surrounding neighborhoods, drinking fountains in Northwest Denver parks lacking public water, shower trailers for safe outdoor spaces to support people experiencing houselessness. That's what people want. There's like nothing wrong with you all. It's what you settle for that's shocking, right? If this is what we want, then why do we have these problems still? It seems to me like if you give a particular neighborhood just a chance to spend $1 million, they'll prioritize all sorts of things that take policing off the table or take other bad ideas off the table. And they rationalize it. They compete with rhetoric, which is having a problematic time right now. And East Denver, more drinking fountains, please. Safer bikeways, please. Sidewalks, please. East Central Denver, accessibility to public transit improvements at City Park, please. Lighting in the night, please. So the thing about that project that I want you to know is that it's really specific. There are neighborhoods in Chicago that have been doing participatory budgeting for a long time, and they came to Denver about 4 years ago and trained a bunch of us, and it was a train-the-trainer session. And my friend Evan, who maybe some of you guys know, who runs Warm Cookies for the Revolution, Evan was a principal part of bringing participatory budgeting to the awareness of City Council through a project called This Machine Has a Soul. And it was amazing. It was just so, it was a project where you say, I hope everyone was smiling when they did it. I hope no one was miserable. Because the kinds of experiments and ideas that were in play just kind of made these activists, these people, behave a little bit more buoyantly. And that's a beautiful thing when you have people who are, in some cases, you know, imagine yourself stressed out about some basic needs for some people that you love and care about, and then imagining yourself go, oh, that's funded. You know, like the kind of emotional and psychic release that is to know that it's a possibility. I think that's amazing. And so we stepped in at a point where it was time to execute the idea and came up with the ballots, the translation schema, and a number of other things that still have to happen. What I would really like you to do, this is my ask, wherever you are, this is my ask, is please mention like participatory budgeting to anyone you know until it gets back to your city council person. And if you know that city council person, just write it on a sheet of paper, throw it in the mail. That would be an amazing thing because they need to bring it back to Mayor Mike Johnson. Mayor Mike Johnson is not funding it properly right now. He's taking a break from it, and maybe he needs to be reacquainted with its benefit. But it comes from city council to the office of Mayor Mike Johnson, and then it goes out to the neighborhoods and to the people. And so ask for it, right? Ask for it by name. Sounds so corny, it's like a 1950s commercial. Ask for it by name. It's called Schlitz malt liquor, okay? But anyway, the point is, Newport cigarettes. You know, but the point is, ask for it by name because it is a thing. Ask for it in the chain of command, so to speak, like try and get it to city council and they'll do the work. Former city council person Robin Kinich was really the person that championed it from city council to the mayor's office, just so you know. So there's a lot of people involved in that project and it was beautiful and we have had a chance to participate in it and it makes everything we do just a little bit more buoyant because we know that people are getting a piece of the government that they deserve. So, you know, big ups to the people who do PB. Second project, the triple loop. Slightly more poetic. It's really intended to be an open source project, so please let this be an introduction to it. There's plenty of ways to get in touch with it and the people who are running it. And again, I participate in a way with it. I help create some of the assets that you'll see as a graphic designer. I help produce some of the visuals and create shape. And we'll talk about shape later. But it's a big deal. This is where you'd go to encounter it. Take a picture, it lasts longer. Take a video, it lasts longer actually, but. When we begin it, it's really a Miro board, and a Miro board where people can move through a lot of research in one place. Some of those are videos that pop up, some of those are links to documents, some of those are sort of concepts held entirely inside of themselves. But this is a process-oriented Miro board. It's also available as a PDF so that you can walk your way through a process. And it's in both colonial languages. there are parts of this, there are parts of this that are so deep, that run so deep through, 100 years of thinking on this topic. There's ideas in here that go far and wide and deep. And it's super important for people to be acknowledged. So everything in this is really well annotated to the source or the origin of the idea and the things that participate in the idea. And of course, principle or commitment in this is to honor the name of those who have inspired this work and recognize the work and process that is similar to ours. And so there's a certain amount of that that's going through this, which makes an investigation of it quite slow. It makes it quite slow and deep, but meaningful, and can change a life. Now, when I say that, I mean it could change the life of a leader, which would change so many more lives. This is the principal idea. There are two hemispheres. There is the hemisphere of action and awareness. And then there are three parts of those hemispheres which talk about the scale of that. The first scale of action is listening. Listening is just not the thing you do before you do something. Listening is, in fact, the action. That's what it is. It's called listening. It really is. It's a thing. It's not the thing you do before the thing. It's the thing. Only in this circumstance am I a fan of surveillance, so that people can remember what they had the opportunity to listen to and go back and listen again when they've changed. Why would they change? Well, the reason why they would change is because the very first part on the awareness side is yourself. And that you actually create an understanding of other people's listening of you and your listening of others. You just understand that better. You create a deep awareness and an abiding for your fellow man, the person who you're listening to, your fellow person. You work hard to see them where they are, and you understand what's getting in the way. You encounter surface-oriented conscious bias, and you name it, and you work on that. And then you might find some subconscious bias, some stuff that you've been told that you believe, but you're not sure why you believe it, like poor people are poor and it's their fault. It's their fault. Therefore, we should create lots of friction to helping them. Because friction makes sure that there's no theft or fraud, because they're not good people, because it's their fault. So therefore, instead, policing is faster and easier and a better sell. Bias. Poor people are poor because it's their fault. Check that one. Pause. Next level of action is what I call designing and futuring, and it's a co-creation. It's the idea that you are going to do this with someone else. You're going to attempt to understand each other and then create a great understanding of what you're working on together. I will say right now, the very first part of that is to make a shape. There you go. I said it, shape. But over on the other side, thanks. Over on the other side, it's really about community awareness, and that is your positionality in a community that you're either a part of or that you want to serve. And it's also about identifying communities, intersectional communities, hyper-intersectional communities, right? Where the same statistics of lack or harm show up over and over and over again, intersectional communities. And then on the awareness side, it's systems, which helps you understand the positionality of various communities in systems and yourself in those communities. And then on the other side of action, it's sustaining long-term change with process management and basically just making it better and protecting the best ideas as you go. It's okay to put bookends on things, but it's really important to have continuous process improvement so that you can come back to it and say, okay, this is what won, this is what didn't win. And guess what that is? That is a application of a theory of change. This is what I did with the chart, which is I started to build on two axes. One axis is the barriers that people experience that are typical, and the other is ideal circumstances. On the ideal circumstances side, there's lots of room for reflection. Managed resources in community, right, which is PB, which is participatory budgeting, managing a resource in community. Near future conditions, that means being able to plan, understanding near future conditions. And when someone says they don't know, you can just say, oh, this is great, this is a chance to use it. Oops, I fucked that up. And then in barriers, we have things like psychic pain and routines and frustrated imaginations, which I think is a really important thing to acknowledge and recognize in people. Lacking time and lacking leadership. And so this is the triple loop. Also, in my opinion, a really amazing transition design project. Because what it does is it changes the way that you lead, and it changes your ability to listen and the opportunities that you get from your ability to listen to people and hear them. It's really my goal to turn this into the new normal. Like there's so little about this that is a bad idea. And I don't mind if it happens at one scale, like just the smallest possible scale. I would think of it as an enormous success if one person in this room was like, hey, let's talk about that some more. Just one. I'm cool with one. My practice, our practice, exists at a very intentional scale because we want to have really important experiences with people. And we want to be changed by the things that we encounter, which is why the triple loop was so important. Because the triple loop basically came out of a single question, which was, how do we capture the DNA of what we have already been for 10 years into a system of thinking? How do we use system thinking to our advantage and kind of build a mechanism how people can engage with who we've become in our journey in advocating for people? And the reason why it says reschool is because the principal thing that this organization decided they wanted to do was create learner advocates. That was their first thing out of the gate, learner advocates, so people could navigate the complex system called education so that they could advocate for their young people, whether they're acculturated or unacculturated people, so that their young people would have full access to this transformative thing called education. Go ahead and criticize it if you like. It deserves plenty of criticism, but people should still have access to what is available and what is good in it. And by doing this, you change the lives of a whole family. And by changing lives of whole families, you change the future of their experiences and the future of their circumstance. And they did that. And I didn't even know them when they did that. They did that. And they did that out of their instinct because they had expertise in higher ed, in ed controls, right? State level education policy. And they saw a gap and they wanted to fill it. Then they made a game. And they made a game for high school guidance counselors and high school administrators to play, to put themselves into the lives of the young people who they say they serve. And so the game was basically a game where you would play the role of a 16 through 19 or 20-year-old person for 4 turns. Each turn was a semester. You could measure it. And it would be a year. It was called Revolve. And it would be a year in the life of a young person who quite possibly had more responsibility than their 28-year-old DPS substitute teacher, who was raising their children in their family, or raising their siblings in their family, or tending to a family member who was not well in their family, or translating for their entire family from some language to some other language. You know, and when they said, I want to be a DJ, and the teacher goes, ugh, they have no idea, DJ gets paid millions. It's a great life to be a DJ. Who amongst us doesn't want to be a DJ? I've been DJing for like 35, 40 years, you know, like I still do a radio show every Tuesday. Don't ask me how I fit it in. It's 4 o'clock p.m., Mountain Standard Time, Radio Rethink. It's called Design to Kill. It's awesome. It's a lot of punk music. But the point is that they moved through this gap again and said, how do we get people to understand each other cross-generationally? How do we get people to really engage with the people they say they serve? And it's by role-playing. And how does that role-play game get created? It's by listening and by translating their lives into a gamified experience amongst adults who can kind of experience it without a lot of barriers, right? And then they came to us to do a redesign of that card and to help it evolve into the game that it is right now. And then they came to us to help them articulate their DNA. And the triple loop is their DNA. And they're super open about sharing it. And they're super open about what it would mean to participate in it. I'm going to say 2 things, and then I'm just going to open it up for questions. What time is it, Jason? 10 minutes. Perfect. I went 4 minutes over. I think it was that land acknowledgement. I got a little weepy. I'm sorry. Not sorry. Thing number 1, until you're ready to respect labor, people and their labor, none of this will be right. If gain is important to you, none of what I say is right. And I'm not saying that you're a bad person. I think that there are moments in lives where it's a good idea to be thinking about the acquisition of some wealth. And that there are moments in life when you have to make more discerning choices because people are following you. That would be the time when you become a role model to children. Try not to lie to them, try not to be a bad example. So I acknowledge that there are people who will be like, that's not nearly as interesting to me as another session that would tell me how to become more wealthy and to speak another kind of exclusive technological language. And for that, I say, not now, but put it in your bones. Put it in your bones and come back to it later. Empathy done poorly is sympathy. Sympathy done poorly is pity. What you want to do is figure out how to feel that connection to another person, to have the courage to be like, I'm going to try really hard to hear you right now, and I'm going to hope that whatever you've got in you that's going to help you connect to me. I'm sorry, I know I'm making prolonged eye contact with you. But I hope that you see how earnestly and how deeply I care about this. Not because it's for me, but because I know that I have the brain skills to process some of this, and I want to spend it doing this work, even if it means to do it at a tiny scale. I'm okay with scale problems. I'm okay with only affecting a few lives. I'm okay if I just am a good dad and stepdad. You've got to be okay with it too. You've got to be okay with operating at a smaller scale. And you've got to maybe mean it more. I only say I mean it more because I might live it harder. I only say I live it harder because I'm a widow, a young widow, and so is my partner now. And that we know what's objectively bad and what isn't when your spouse is dying in front of you. So it's a skill, something that comes along with that territory. So I don't kind of say it from like, like I was raised on food stamps, because that's not my story. But my story is understanding what is truly and deeply precious. And human connection and the ability to tell each other's stories and to hold space for each other, that is fucking special. And if you can do it at a scale of participatory budgeting, that's amazing. And if you can do it with a triple loop methodology and train trainers to do that with each other, that's amazing. Because the voter-led ballot initiative is something that only 14 states have. We have it here in Colorado, and we've made tremendous safe spaces with it. And I suggest we continue to make it a really great place to live and work and thrive. Thanks. I'll take a question or two if you have one, and that's fine. So how participatory budgeting works is that a group of people called a steering committee get together, and they're sort of put forward as community leaders, and they write a set of rules. And the rules are the means by which people will use rhetoric and or compete, and the way that they will convene in order to decide which projects win and lose, and so on and so forth. The ballot is a product that we say, or at least the manager of this project says, this is a successful way that other municipalities, other neighborhoods have done it, is with a ballot. And it's with a tiered voting. So you pick first, second, and third choice. And the ballots are then distributed to everybody in those neighborhoods, including prisons. We made ballots without staples in them to go into prisons. But the beautiful thing about it, and something which you guys should get, it's an election year, you'll probably get clear about a few new words, but the word rules is a very important thing. In state houses, you can change rules in very quiet ways, which then affect legislation that's coming at those rules. So one of the reasons why trigger laws exist and why Tennessee is such a shithole right now is because the rules have been changing at an alarming rate, and democratic thinkers or liberal thinkers can't intercept those rules in the rulemaking process. So therefore, when legislation shows up, it's actually enacted in really harmful ways towards people. The rules part of participatory budgeting exists because we are aware of how rules work, and we say, hey, why don't we let the community create a set of rules that they're comfortable with, and the budget for those projects include paying people to participate in their government, because the people who are elected get paychecks. So any of our participation in that is a really good idea. Does that go a long way to answer your question? That there are mechanics built into the PB process, and those mechanics are designed and defined by a group of people who are part of that community. The next step in that process, just in case you're curious, is that city people, like heads of agencies and people who work in agencies, come through the community and tell them how much things generally cost, so that they can think about whether they want to shoot for one project or multiple projects with the budget that they have to work with. It's very, very sort of easy budgeting process when they start to ask for things that everyone knows the cost of. So a sidewalk cut building sidewalks, traffic signals, and bus shelters, and so on and so forth. Thanks for the question.